The yellow fever had left Emmeline Crawford different, and everyone in Randsburg, California knew it. She was 20 years old in the summer of 1882, with honey-colored hair that fell in waves down her back and eyes the color of spring grass. But the sickness that had swept through the mining town 3 years earlier had stolen something from her that the physicians could not name. Her thoughts came slower now, her words simpler, and though her heart beat strong and her body had healed, the townspeople whispered that the fever had taken the sharp edges of her mind and left something softer, something they did not quite understand. "She is too simple now," her Aunt Beatrice said to anyone who would listen, shaking her head with practiced sorrow. "Too simple to understand the complexities of the world, too simple to marry, to manage a household, to understand what love truly means." Emmeline heard these words often enough that they settled into her bones like dust from the mining operations that surrounded the small desert town. She worked in her aunt's boarding house, changing linens and sweeping floors, tasks that required her hands more than the quick wit she had supposedly lost. The miners who stayed there treated her kindly enough, speaking to her in the slow, loud voices people used with children, even though she was a grown woman. She did not correct them. What would be the point? The boarding house sat on the edge of Randsburg, where the desert scrub gave way to the rocky foothills of the Sierra Nevada. It was a harsh landscape, beautiful in its own way, all golden earth and endless sky. Emmeline loved it, though she could not always find the words to explain why. The vastness made sense to her in a way that crowded rooms and quick conversations did not. It was on a Tuesday morning in late June when Yannick Olsen first walked into her aunt's boarding house, and Emmeline's life shifted like sand beneath uncertain feet. He filled the doorway completely, this mountain of a man, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the frame. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders in waves that suggested he had not seen a proper barber in months, maybe years. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but it could not hide the strong jaw beneath or the startling blue of his eyes. He wore buckskin trousers and a worn flannel shirt that stretched across a chest and arms dense with muscle, the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in wild places. Emmeline stood frozen in the hallway, her arms full of fresh linens, simply staring at him. She had never seen anyone quite like him. "Help you?" Her Aunt Beatrice appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the stranger's appearance, the way he seemed more wild animal than civilized man. "Need a room," he said, his voice deep and rough as though he did not use it often. "Week, maybe 2. Came down from the mountains to sell furs, buy supplies." "We have standards here," Beatrice said primly. "No drinking, no gambling, no women of ill repute brought to the rooms." Something that might have been amusement flickered in those blue eyes. "Will not be a problem. $5 for the week, in advance. Breakfast and dinner included." He pulled a leather pouch from his belt and counted out coins with hands that were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them every day of his life. Beatrice took the money with a sniff, then turned to Emmeline. "Girl, show him to room 7. And hurry back. Those floors will not sweep themselves." Emmeline nodded, clutching the linens tighter to her chest. She climbed the stairs, acutely aware of the mountain man following behind her, his footsteps heavy on the wooden steps. She could feel his presence like heat from a fire, taking up all the air in the narrow hallway. Room 7 was at the end of the hall, small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Emmeline pushed the door open and stepped inside to place the fresh linens on the bed. "This is your room," she said carefully, making sure each word came out right. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 7. The washroom is down the hall. When she turned, she found him watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow was not. Most people looked past her or through her, their eyes sliding away as though her difference made her invisible. This man looked directly at her, seeing her in a way that made her breath catch. "What is your name?" he asked. "Emmeline Crawford." "Yannick Olsen." He did not offer his hand, perhaps sensing that she might not know what to do with it. "Thank you for the room, Emmeline Crawford." The way he said her full name, carefully and completely, made something warm bloom in her chest. She ducked her head and hurried from the room, her heart beating faster than it should. Over the next few days, Emmeline found herself noticing Yannick in ways she had not noticed any of the other boarders. He rose early, before the sun touched the eastern mountains, and she would see him from the kitchen window, standing in the yard and stretching his massive frame. He moved with surprising grace for someone so large, and she watched the play of muscles beneath his shirt with a fascination she did not entirely understand. He did not speak much at meals, sitting at the end of the long table and eating with focused attention, but his eyes found Emmeline often. She served the food alongside her aunt, and every time she refilled his coffee or brought another helping of biscuits, she felt his gaze on her like a physical touch. "That mountain man is odd," one of the miners said at dinner on the third night. "Barely says 2 words. What kind of person chooses to live up there alone like that? Probably running from something," another agreed. "Law, maybe, or a woman." Yannick said nothing, just continued eating, but Emmeline saw his jaw tighten beneath his beard. After dinner, she was washing dishes in the kitchen when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Yannick standing in the doorway, looking too large for the domestic space. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hands dripping soapy water onto the floor. He was quiet for a long moment, as though choosing his words with great care. "The miners earlier, their talk bothered you." It was not a question, but Emmeline answered anyway. "People talk, they always talk. About me, about everyone." She turned back to the dishes, suddenly shy. "They say I am too simple to understand things. Too simple for love or marriage or normal life." She did not know why she told him this, why the words spilled out of her like water from a broken pitcher. Perhaps it was because he, too, seemed separate from the easy flow of normal conversation, standing outside it the way she did. "You seem to understand plenty," Yannick said quietly. Emmeline's hands stilled in the wash water. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "They say the fever took part of my mind. Maybe it took the parts that do not matter." She turned to look at him again, this strange mountain man who spoke so few words but made each one count. His blue eyes were serious, honest in a way that made her throat tight. "I should finish the dishes," she whispered. He nodded and left without another word, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible barrier crossed. The next morning, Emmeline was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard shouting from the front. She dropped the wet sheet back into the basket and hurried around the side of the building to find a crowd gathered in the street. Her Aunt Beatrice stood on the porch, her face pale, while 2 men on horseback argued with each other. "She cannot just wander off," one of the men shouted. He was young, perhaps 25, dressed in the fine clothes of someone with money. "She is not capable of making her own decisions." "Now, Philip," the other man said, his tone placating. He was older, with silver threading through his dark hair. "Let us discuss this reasonably." "There is nothing to discuss, father. You agreed that Emmeline would marry me. The girl needs someone to take care of her, and we need the boarding house property. It is a fair arrangement." Emmeline felt ice slide down her spine. "Marry? She knew nothing of any marriage arrangement. Beatrice wrung her hands. "Philip, she has not agreed to anything. I merely mentioned that perhaps in time, if you were willing to be patient with her limitations." "I am tired of patience," Philip snapped. "I have been more than generous waiting this long. The marriage will happen next month, and that is final." "You cannot force her," someone in the crowd called out, but the protest was weak, uncertain. "She is incapable of making such decisions herself," Philip's father said smoothly. "Her aunt, as her guardian, has the authority to arrange what is best for her. And what could be better than marriage to a respectable man who is willing to overlook her deficiencies?" Emmeline wanted to run, to disappear into the desert and never return, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. This could not be happening. She did not want to marry Philip, did not want to be traded like property because her aunt wanted to sell the boarding house and Philip's family wanted the land it sat on. "Emmeline." Beatrice spotted her and beckoned urgently. "Come here, child. Tell Philip how grateful you are for his generous offer." Emmeline walked forward on numb legs, feeling every eye on her, judging her, finding her lacking. Philip looked down at her from his horse with the expression of someone who had just purchased a somewhat defective piece of livestock but would make do. "Hello, Emmeline," he said, his voice falsely kind. "We are to be married soon. Does that not make you happy?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her thoughts tumbled over each other, too fast and too slow at the same time, and she could not grab hold of any of them long enough to form a sentence. "See," Philip said to the crowd. "She does not even understand what is happening. It is a blessing that someone is willing to take responsibility for her. She understands just fine." The voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. Yannick stepped out from the boarding house doorway, and people actually moved back to give him space. He looked even larger in the bright morning sun, his shoulders casting shadows, his presence commanding attention simply by existing. "This is none of your concern, mountain man," Philip said, his hand moving to the pistol at his belt. "Stay out of matters that do not involve you." "Emmeline," Yannick said, ignoring Philip completely and looking directly at her. "Do you want to marry this man?" Everyone went quiet, waiting. Emmeline felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Yannick's steady blue eyes, saw the question there, the genuine desire to know what she wanted, not what others thought she should want. "No," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I do not want to marry him." "You see," Philip laughed, harsh and cutting. "She does not know what she wants. She cannot possibly," she said no. Yannick took a step forward, and there was something dangerous in the movement, something that reminded everyone watching that this was a man who survived alone in the wilderness, who knew how to fight and hunt and kill if necessary. "That is a complete answer." "You have no authority here," Philip's father said coldly. "Beatrice Crawford is her legal guardian and the arrangement is made. The girl will marry my son." Yannick's gaze shifted to Beatrice, who shrank back against the porch railing. "That true? You are selling her to them." "I am doing what is best for her," Beatrice said defensively. "She needs someone to care for her, and I am getting old. The boarding house is too much work, and the offer for the property is generous. Everyone benefits. Everyone except Emmeline. She does not understand enough to know what she needs." Yannick was quiet for a moment, his jaw working beneath his beard. Then he said, "She could marry me instead." The words fell into the crowd like stones into still water. Emmeline stared at him, sure she had misheard. "What?" Philip sputtered. "That is absurd. You are a stranger, a vagrant who lives in the wilderness like an animal. You have nothing to offer her." "I have a cabin in the mountains," Yannick said calmly. 20 acres of good land, a stream for water, hunting and trapping for income. I can provide for a wife, and I would not force her into something she does not want." Beatrice looked torn between outrage and confusion. "You cannot possibly be serious. You have known her for less than a week, long enough to see she deserves better than being sold to the highest bidder." His eyes found Emmeline again. "If she is willing—" Emmeline could barely breathe. This could not be real. Men like Yannick, strong and capable and honest, did not offer marriage to women like her, women everyone said were too simple to understand love. But he stood there waiting for her answer, and she realized with sudden clarity that whatever happened next was entirely her choice. She thought of Philip, of being tied to a man who saw her as defective property. She thought of her aunt, who had never been cruel but had never really seen her either. And she thought of Yannick, who had looked at her like she mattered, who had listened to her words and believed them. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I will marry you." The shouting started immediately. Philip jumped down from his horse, his face red with anger. Beatrice grabbed Emmeline's arm, trying to pull her toward the boarding house. But Yannick moved faster, his large frame suddenly between Emmeline and everyone else, a wall of muscle and protection. "She made her choice," he said, and his voice carried a finality that silenced the protests. "If anyone has a legal objection, speak it now." Philip's father was the one who answered, his eyes calculating. "The girl is of age and can legally choose her own husband. If she truly wishes to marry this man instead of my son, the law allows it. However, Beatrice, our agreement regarding the boarding house property was contingent on the marriage alliance. That is now void." Beatrice's face went white. "But you promised. Promises change with circumstances." The older man gathered his horse's reins, already dismissing the situation as no longer worth his time. "Come, Philip. Let the mountain man have his simple bride. They deserve each other." Philip looked like he wanted to argue, but his father's glare stopped him. They rode away, the crowd slowly dispersing, people muttering and shaking their heads at the strange turn of events. Beatrice rounded on Emmeline, her face tight with anger. "You foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you have done? That was your only chance at a decent marriage, at a normal life. And you threw it away for a stranger who will probably drag you into the wilderness and abandon you within a month. Or I could have stayed here and been traded like a piece of furniture," Emmeline said quietly. The words surprised her, their clarity, their firmness. Maybe Yannick was right. Maybe the fever had only taken the parts that did not matter. "You are making a terrible mistake," Beatrice said, but there was no real fight left in her voice. "When it all falls apart, do not come crying back to me." "I will not," Emmeline promised. Yannick placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle despite his size. "We should get married today, before anyone changes their mind or tries to make trouble." Emmeline nodded. The minister in Randsburg was a former miner named Josiah who had found religion after a cave-in nearly killed him. He agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon in the small church at the center of town, with two of the more sympathetic miners serving as witnesses. Emmeline wore her only good dress, pale blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had no family to attend, and Yannick had no one either, so they stood alone before the minister and spoke their vows in steady voices. When Yannick slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Emmeline felt the weight of it like a promise, like hope. "You may kiss your bride," Josiah said with a gentle smile. Yannick cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with surprising tenderness and pressed his lips to hers. It was Emmeline's first kiss, and she felt it all the way down to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body and made her understand, suddenly, what all the fuss about romance was about. When they parted, Yannick was looking at her with something soft in his eyes, something that made her feel seen and valued in a way she had never experienced before. They spent their wedding night in room 7 at the boarding house, since Yannick had paid through the week and Beatrice could not legally throw them out yet. Emmeline sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, suddenly nervous. She knew what was supposed to happen between a husband and wife, though the details were fuzzy, shared in whispers by women who assumed she would never need to know such things. Yannick stood by the window, giving her space. "I will not push you into anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "We can take things slow, get to know each other first." Emmeline felt tears prick her eyes. "Everyone says I cannot understand love, that I am too simple for it." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Love is not some complicated puzzle that requires a sharp mind. It is caring for someone, wanting them to be happy, choosing them every day. You can do that just fine." "How do you know?" she whispered. "Because you have already shown me more honesty and courage in a few days than most people manage in a lifetime." He moved to sit beside her on the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "I spent 10 years in those mountains, Emmeline, alone because I did not fit in down here either. My father was a trapper, taught me the life before he died when I was 15. I have been on my own since then, and I chose it because people are complicated and cruel and I did not want to deal with them. But you are different. You say what you mean. You do not play games or hide behind pretty words. That is worth more than all the clever conversation in the world." She looked at him, this strong, solitary man who had chosen her when he could have chosen no one. "I am afraid I will disappoint you." "Impossible," he said simply, and kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, until Emmeline felt her nervousness melt into something warmer, something that felt like belonging. They left Randsburg 3 days later, all of Emmeline's worldly possessions packed into 2 worn bags that Yannick tied to his horse with practiced ease. Beatrice barely said goodbye, still bitter about losing the property deal, but Emmeline found she did not care. She was walking away from a life where she had been seen as a burden, a problem to be solved, and toward something unknown but potentially beautiful. Yannick had 2 horses, his own massive bay gelding and a gentler mare he had purchased for Emmeline. They rode north into the Sierra Nevada, following trails that existed more in Yannick's memory than on any map. The landscape changed as they climbed, the desert scrub giving way to pine forests and granite outcroppings, the air growing cooler and clearer. Emmeline had never been this far from town, and everything amazed her. The way the sunlight filtered through the pine needles in golden shafts, the sound of a creek tumbling over rocks, the sight of a deer bounding away through the underbrush. She pointed these things out to Yannick, who watched her face more than the scenery, a small smile hiding in his beard. They camped the first night in a clearing beside a stream, and Yannick showed her how to build a proper fire, how to arrange the stones to reflect heat and contain the flames. He caught trout from the stream with his bare hands, a trick that left Emmeline laughing in delight, and cooked them over the fire with wild herbs he gathered from the forest floor. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, watching him work with efficient, practiced movements. "My father," Yannick said. "He believed a man should be able to survive anywhere with nothing but his wits and his hands. We spent months at a time in the mountains, just the 2 of us. He taught me to read the weather, track animals, find water. Everything I needed to stay alive." "Do you miss him? Every day?" He turned the fish carefully. "But he would have liked you. He always said the best people were the ones who did not waste time on nonsense. You would have met his standards." They ate as the stars came out, more stars than Emmeline had ever seen, the sky so thick with them it looked like someone had spilled milk across the darkness. She lay on her back on the bedroll Yannick had laid out, staring up in wonder. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Yannick lay down beside her, his shoulder touching hers. The mountains are honest. What you see is what you get. No hidden meanings, no false promises. I always preferred that to town living. But you came down to Randsburg, needed supplies, and I am glad I did. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. Otherwise, I would not have found you. Emmeline turned her head to look at him, seeing his profile outlined against the stars. You think we are crazy, getting married so fast? Probably, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. But sometimes the craziest things are the ones that make the most sense. They reached Yannick's cabin late the following afternoon. It sat in a high mountain valley, surrounded by towering pines and protected on 3 sides by granite cliffs. A stream ran past the front of the property, crystal clear and cold enough to make Emmeline gasp when she dipped her fingers in it. The cabin itself was larger than she had expected, built from hand-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney at one end and real glass windows that must have been hauled up from town with great effort. I built it over 2 years, Yannick said, dismounting and helping her down from her mare. Wanted it done right, built to last. The roof is cedar shakes, the floor is plank, not dirt. It is not fancy, but it is solid. Emmeline walked to the door, running her hand over the smooth wood. It is perfect. Inside was one large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a real iron stove, and a loft above that served as the bedroom. Furniture was sparse but well made. A table, 2 chairs, shelves filled with supplies, a rocking chair near the fireplace. Everything was neat and organized, the home of someone who lived alone and took care of his possessions. I will need to build more furniture, Yannick said, watching her take it all in. Another chair, a better wardrobe. I was not planning on a wife when I built this place. I can help, Emmeline offered. I am good with my hands, sewing, mending, cooking. I can learn other things. I know you can. He set her bags down near the ladder to the loft. Are you tired? It was a long ride. She was exhausted, actually bone-deep weary in a way she had not felt in years. But it was a good tired, the kind that came from doing something rather than just existing. A little. Let me show you the loft. He climbed the ladder first, then reached down to help her up. The loft was cozy, with a real bed frame and mattress, thick quilts piled on top, and a window that looked out over the valley. Emmeline could see for miles from up here, all the way to distant peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. Did you make the quilts? She asked, touching the careful stitching. My mother did before she died. They are some of the few things I have left from before. He looked almost embarrassed. I know it is not what a woman is used to. It is wonderful, Emmeline interrupted. All of it. The cabin, the valley, the quilts. I feel safer here than I ever did in town. Something in Yannick's expression softened. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Emmeline rested her head against his broad chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart through the worn fabric of his shirt. This was what she wanted, she realized. Not complicated courtship or clever words, but this simple, solid feeling of being held by someone who truly cared. That night they made love for the first time, slow and careful, Yannick treating her like something precious and fragile, even though she was neither. Emmeline had been nervous, but he was patient, reading her responses, showing her with touch and whispers what pleased him, and asking what pleased her. It was awkward at moments, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful in its honesty. 2 people learning each other without pretense or performance. Afterward, lying tangled together under the quilts, Emmeline felt something settle in her chest, some knot of anxiety she had carried for years finally loosening. Happy? Yannick asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Yes, she said, and meant it completely. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Emmeline found deeply satisfying. Yannick taught her the routines of mountain life, how to tend the vegetable garden he had planted, how to preserve meat and fish, how to read the signs of changing weather. He showed her his trap lines, explaining which animals he hunted and why, teaching her to move quietly through the forest so as not to disturb the wildlife unnecessarily. In turn, Emmeline brought organization to the cabin that had been missing. She cleaned and arranged, hung curtains in the windows, cooked meals that were more than just basic sustenance. She had never been allowed to make decisions in her aunt's house. But here, Yannick asked her opinion on everything from where to place the new chair he was building to what supplies they should request when he made his next trip to town. "You live here too," he said when she expressed surprise at being consulted. "Your comfort matters as much as mine." It was such a simple concept, but no one had ever treated her that way before. In town, decisions had been made for her, around her, without her input because everyone assumed she could not understand complexity. But Yannick showed her that most decisions were not actually that complicated. Did she prefer beans or potatoes with dinner? Did she want the new shelf in the kitchen or the main room? Should they get chickens? And if so, how many? "I think 6 chickens," Emmeline said one morning as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds from around the squash plants. "Enough for eggs every day, but not so many that caring for them becomes difficult." "6 it is," Yannick agreed. "I will build a coop next week." Emmeline sat back on her heels, looking at him as he worked. Even doing something as simple as weeding, his strength was evident in the way he moved, the muscles of his arms and back shifting beneath his shirt. His hair was tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was slightly neater than it had been, since Emmeline had convinced him to let her trim it. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "I am just thinking how strange life is. A month ago I was sweeping floors in my aunt's boarding house, believing I would never have anything more than that. Now I am here with you, planning chicken coops and planting squash. It does not seem real." Yannick moved to sit beside her, his large frame casting a shadow over the garden bed. "Does it feel wrong?" "No, it feels right. That is what seems strange." She picked at a loose thread on her skirt. "Everyone always told me I could not understand love, that it was too complicated for me. But this does not feel complicated. It feels simple and good and true." "That is because love is not supposed to be complicated," Yannick said. He took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing across her knuckles. "People make it complicated with rules and expectations and games. But at its heart, love is just choosing to be with someone, to care for them, to build a life together. You understand that perfectly." Emmeline leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm in the morning sun. "I am glad you came to Randsburg. So am I." They sat there for a while, surrounded by growing things and the sound of the stream and the whisper of wind through pine trees, and Emmeline felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not excitement or drama, but this quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As summer deepened into full bloom, Emmeline discovered she had a gift for reading the mountains in ways that surprised even Yannick. She could not always explain how she knew things, but she could feel when a storm was coming hours before the clouds appeared, could sense where the deer would be grazing, could tell if the fish would be biting in the stream. It was as though losing the quick, analytical part of her mind had opened up some other sense, something more instinctive and primal. "You are a natural at this," Yannick said one afternoon after she led him to a spot where they caught enough trout for a week. "Better than I was after years of practice." Emmeline shrugged, pleased but not quite knowing how to accept the compliment. It just feels right, like the mountains are speaking a language I can understand without thinking too hard about it. Maybe that is the secret, Yannick mused. Thinking too hard gets in the way of truly seeing. They were standing in the stream, their pant legs rolled up, the cold water rushing past their calves. Yannick had been teaching Emmeline to catch fish with her hands, a skill that required patience and perfect stillness. She had managed to so far, her face lighting up with triumph each time her fingers closed around a slippery body. "Try again," Yannick encouraged. "There is a big one near that rock." Emmeline waded slowly toward the boulder he indicated, moving with the current rather than against it, her hands hovering just above the water's surface. She could feel the fish, sense its presence more than see it, and she waited with the patience Yannick had taught her until the moment felt right. Then she struck, fast and sure, and pulled a fat trout from the water, laughing as it flapped in her grip. "I did it," she cried, holding up her prize. Yannick was grinning, his whole face transformed by the expression. He rarely smiled fully, but when he did, it made Emmeline's heart flip in her chest. "You are a better fisherman than most men I have known." "Fishwoman," she corrected, and he laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. They carried their catch back to the cabin and spent the evening preparing the fish for smoking, a process Yannick had explained to her several times. Emmeline was getting better at remembering the steps, especially when she could do them with her hands rather than just hearing about them. She cleaned and filleted while Yannick tended the smokehouse, and they worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between people who are completely at ease with each other. That night, lying in bed with Yannick's arms wrapped around her, Emmeline asked a question that had been on her mind for days. "Do you ever get lonely up here? Before I came, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment, his breath warm against her hair. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in winter when the snow is deep and it can be weeks between seeing another soul. But I preferred loneliness to the alternative. People in town always wanted me to be something I was not. Smaller, quieter, more civilized. Up here, I could just be myself." "I understand that," Emmeline said softly. "Being around people who think you are broken is worse than being alone. You are not broken." His arms tightened around her. "You are perfect exactly as you are." Emmeline rolled over to face him, searching his eyes in the dim light from the moon coming through the window. "Do you really believe that?" "With everything I am," he said, and kissed her with such tenderness that Emmeline felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, the words coming naturally without thought or planning. "I love you too," he whispered back, and showed her with his hands and mouth and body just how much he meant it. August brought the height of summer heat, even to the high mountains. Yannick finished the chicken coop, and they rode down to a lower settlement to purchase 6 hens and a rooster. The birds adapted quickly to their new home, and Emmeline loved caring for them, collecting eggs each morning and talking to the chickens as though they could understand her. "They can understand you," Yannick said when he caught her having a conversation with the largest hen, a bossy brown bird Emmeline had named Beatrice in ironic tribute to her aunt. "Maybe not the words, but the intent. Animals are smart that way." "Beatrice here says she wants more corn," Emmeline reported seriously. "Beatrice is greedy," Yannick countered, but he scattered an extra handful of corn anyway, smiling at Emmeline's delighted laugh. They were building something together, Emmeline realized. Not just a life, but a language of their own, full of private jokes and shared understandings. Yannick taught her to read tracks, to identify plants, to shoot his rifle with surprising accuracy. She taught him that meals could be more than just fuel, that a house became a home with small touches like flowers in a jar or curtains that matched, that talking about feelings was not a weakness but a strength. I never knew I was lonely until I was not anymore, Yannick confessed one night as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the stars emerge. I thought I was content alone, but content is not the same as happy. You make me happy, Emmeline. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. You make me feel like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings and ideas are worth something. No one ever made me feel that way before. Then they were fools. Maybe, she agreed, but their foolishness led me to you, so I cannot regret it too much. He pulled her close, and they sat together until the night grew cold and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Two people who had found in each other what the rest of the world had failed to see: worth, value, love. September brought the first hints of autumn, the aspens on the hillside starting to turn gold, the nights growing crisp. Yannick began preparing for winter in earnest, chopping and stacking wood, checking the cabin for gaps that needed chinking, making sure their supplies were adequate for the months of snow ahead. Will we be truly snowed in? Emmeline asked, watching him work. Unable to leave at all. For weeks at a time, probably, Yannick said, splitting another log with one powerful swing of the axe. The snow can get 10-15 feet deep. The passes become impassable. We will have each other, the animals, and whatever we have stored. That is it. The idea should have been frightening, but Emmeline found it oddly appealing. Months alone with Yannick, no outside world to intrude, just the two of them in their cabin against the elements. It sounded like paradise. I am not afraid, she said. Yannick paused in his work, leaning on the axe handle and looking at her with those blue eyes that still made her breath catch. Neither am I. I used to dread winter, the long isolation, but this year I am looking forward to it, because you will not be alone, because I will be with you. They worked together to prepare for the cold months ahead. Emmeline learned to preserve vegetables in the root cellar Yannick had dug beneath the cabin, to make candles from rendered fat, to tan hides for clothing and blankets. Her hands grew rough and calloused, her skin bronzed from the mountain sun, her body strong from the physical labor. She barely recognized herself when she caught her reflection in the stream, this capable woman with bright eyes and a ready smile. I look different, she said to Yannick one afternoon as they washed clothes in the creek. You look happy, he said simply, and she was, deliriously, completely happy in a way she had not known was possible. Every day brought new challenges and new joys, from the simple pleasure of fresh eggs for breakfast to the satisfaction of mastering a new skill. Yannick praised her efforts without condescension, corrected her mistakes without judgment, and trusted her to be a full partner in their life together. One evening in late September, they were sitting by the fire after dinner when Yannick pulled out a leather-bound book Emmeline had not seen before. He opened it carefully, revealing pages covered in careful handwriting. My father's journal, he explained. He wrote about his trapping seasons, the things he learned, advice for surviving the mountains. I have been thinking I should start my own journal, recording our life here. For our children, maybe, someday. Emmeline felt warmth bloom in her chest at the casual mention of children, of a future that extended beyond just the two of them. That is a wonderful idea. Would you help me write it? Your perspective is as important as mine. I am not good with writing, she said hesitantly. The letters get mixed up sometimes since the fever. Then you tell me what to write and I will be your hands. He smiled at her. We make a good team that way. So they began their journal, recording the daily rhythms of mountain life, the lessons learned and the small triumphs. Emmeline would describe what she had seen or done, and Yannick would translate her words onto the page, sometimes adding his own observations. It became a nightly ritual they both cherished, a way of honoring their life together and preserving it for whatever future awaited. October painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the aspens brilliant against the dark green of the pines. Yannick took Emmeline higher into the mountains than they had gone before, to a meadow that overlooked 3 different valleys, the view so expansive it made her dizzy. "This is my favorite place," he said, dismounting and helping her down from her mare. "I come here when I need to think, to remember how big the world is and how small our problems are in comparison." They spread a blanket and lay on their backs, watching clouds drift overhead. Emmeline could hear elk bugling in the distance, their calls echoing across the valleys, the sound both mournful and beautiful. "I want to stay here forever," she said dreamily. "Just freeze this moment and live in it always." "We cannot freeze moments," Yannick said, "but we can build a lifetime of them. Every day, a new moment to treasure." Emmeline rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. His hair had grown even longer, nearly to the middle of his back now, and his beard was full and thick. He looked like some ancient warrior, strong and fierce and untamed. But his eyes, when they met hers, were gentle, full of love that needed no words to express. "I never thanked you," she said quietly. "For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me, not what everyone else thought I was. You gave me a life I did not even know I could have." Yannick sat up, pulling her into his lap, his arms wrapped around her waist. "You gave me the same thing. I was half alive before you, just going through the motions. You brought color back to my world." They kissed there on the mountain, surrounded by the glory of autumn, and Emmeline thought her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it all. The first snow came in early November, waking Emmeline before dawn with its hushed silence. She climbed down from the loft to find Yannick already stoking the fire, and together they stood at the window and watched the flakes fall, thick and steady, blanketing the valley in white. "And so it begins," Yannick said, his arm around her shoulders. "We will likely not see bare ground again until April." "I am ready," Emmeline said, and meant it. Winter in the mountains was both harder and more wonderful than she had imagined. The work was constant, keeping the fire going, hauling water from the stream before it froze, caring for the horses and chickens, preparing meals, melting snow for washing. But there was also a coziness to it, the two of them tucked into their cabin while the world outside disappeared beneath snow and ice. Yannick taught her to snowshoe, and on clear days they would trek through the winter landscape, checking trap lines and hunting for game. Emmeline learned to appreciate the stark beauty of winter, the way the snow muffled sound and made everything feel hushed and sacred, the brilliance of sunlight on fresh powder, the delicate architecture of ice forming on the stream. During the long evenings, they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Yannick told her stories of his childhood, of his mother who died when he was 10, and his father who raised him alone in these same mountains. Emmeline shared her own fragmented memories of life before the fever, of parents who had died when she was young and an aunt who had taken her in out of duty rather than love. "We are both orphans," Yannick observed one night. "Both alone until we found each other." "Not alone anymore," Emmeline corrected, resting her head on his chest as they sat together in the rocking chair watching the fire. "No," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Not anymore." Christmas came and went quietly. They had no decorations or gifts, but Yannick surprised Emmeline by playing a harmonica he had forgotten he owned, filling the cabin with surprisingly beautiful music. Emmeline sang along, her voice untrained but pure, and they made their own celebration out of songs and laughter and a special meal of roasted venison. By January, Emmeline realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Yannick one morning as they ate breakfast. "I think I might be carrying a child," she said, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, nervous about his reaction. Yannick went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. All the signs are there." He was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her up and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes, his face transformed by joy. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Emmeline asked, her own tears spilling over. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He kissed her deeply, then knelt down and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, I am your father, I cannot wait to meet you." Emmeline laughed through her tears, running her fingers through his long hair. "We have months yet, I know, but I wanted to introduce myself anyway." The pregnancy changed things in subtle ways. Yannick became even more protective, insisting Emmeline rest more and work less, though she argued she was perfectly capable of doing everything she had been doing before. He built a cradle from pine wood, carving it with meticulous care, sanding it smooth so no rough edges could harm tender skin. Emmeline sewed baby clothes from soft flannel, her stitches careful and even, imagining the small person who would wear them. "Do you think they will be like you or like me?" she asked one evening as they worked on their respective projects. "Both, hopefully," Yannick said. "Your kindness and honesty may be my strength. Your patience and skill," Emmeline added, "my ability to see the world differently. They will be perfect," Yannick said with absolute certainty, "because they will be ours." Winter dragged on, the snow piling higher and higher until the cabin windows were half buried and stepping outside meant climbing up through a tunnel Yannick had to dig fresh each morning. But inside, they were warm and safe and happier than either had ever been. In late February, Yannick woke Emmeline in the middle of the night, his face serious. "Listen." She heard it then, a distant rumble that grew louder, shaking the cabin. Avalanche somewhere on the mountains around them. They had been lucky so far, the cabin positioned in a spot that had never been hit, but the sound was still terrifying. Yannick held her close until the rumbling stopped, his heart beating fast against her ear. "We are safe," he assured her. "The cabin has stood through worse." But Emmeline could feel his fear, the knowledge that they were truly alone up here and vulnerable to forces neither of them could control. If something happened to one of them, if the baby came early, if illness struck, there would be no help, no doctor, no rescue. "Promise me," she said quietly. "Promise me that if something goes wrong, you will save yourself. Do not die trying to save me." "I cannot promise that," Yannick said fiercely. "You and this baby are my whole world now. If I lost you, I would not want to survive." "You have to promise," Emmeline insisted. "For the baby. They will need at least one parent. Then we will both survive," Yannick said. "That is the only acceptable option." March brought the first signs of spring, the snow beginning to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. The creek swelled with runoff, rushing and wild, and the days grew noticeably longer. Emmeline's belly had grown round and hard, the baby active inside her, kicking and rolling in ways that made her gasp with surprise and delight. "They are strong," Yannick said, his hand on her stomach feeling the movements, "like their mother." "I am not strong," Emmeline protested. "You are the strongest person I know," he countered. "You survived illness that killed others. You left everything familiar to marry a stranger. You adapted to mountain life with no complaint. You are growing a whole new person inside you. If that is not strength, I do not know what is." By April, the passes were clear enough that Yannick felt comfortable making a trip down to the settlement for supplies and, more importantly, to bring back a woman named Sarah who had experience with birthing. Sarah was in her 50s, the widow of a trapper, and she agreed to come stay with them for a few weeks around Emmeline's due time. "First babies can be unpredictable," Sarah said, her sharp eyes assessing Emmeline with professional interest. "But you look healthy and strong. The baby is positioned well. I do not anticipate problems, but it is good to be prepared." Emmeline liked Sarah immediately. The older woman was brisk and no nonsense, but there was kindness beneath the practical exterior. She set up in the main room, giving the young couple their privacy, and spent her days helping Emmeline prepare for the birth and teaching Yannick what he would need to do to assist. "You are going to faint," Sarah predicted, eyeing Yannick's pale face as she described the process. "I will not," he insisted. "I have gutted elk and skinned bears. I can handle this." "This is different," Sarah said knowingly. "This is someone you love." But when Emmeline's labor began on a warm evening in late April, Yannick proved Sarah wrong. He stayed by Emmeline's side through every contraction, his strength supporting her when her own failed, his voice talking her through the pain with calm encouragement. And when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Yannick was the one who caught him, tears streaming down his face as he placed the baby on Emmeline's chest. "A boy," Sarah announced unnecessarily, wiping the infant clean with efficient hands. "Strong lungs on him. That is good." Emmeline could barely see through her own tears, looking down at the tiny person they had created, this perfect combination of her and Yannick. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be blue like his father's, and when he wrapped his tiny hand around Emmeline's finger, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "What should we name him?" Yannick asked, his voice rough with emotion. Emmeline thought of all they had been through, all they had survived to reach this moment. "James," she said. "James for strong, James for steadfast." "James Olsen," Yannick said, trying it out. "It is perfect." Sarah stayed another week, making sure both Emmeline and the baby were healthy and teaching Emmeline the basics of nursing and caring for an infant. Then she packed her things and prepared to return to the settlement, accepting payment in the form of furs and smoked meat. "You did well," she told Emmeline before she left. "Both of you. That boy is lucky to have you as parents." "We are the lucky ones," Emmeline said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a good baby, rarely fussy, but the work of caring for an infant while managing all the other demands of mountain life left Emmeline perpetually tired. Yannick helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James when he could not sleep, changing diapers without complaint, splitting his attention between providing for his family and being present for every moment he could. "I used to think I knew what my life would be," Yannick said one morning as he held James, the baby sleeping peacefully against his broad chest. "Alone in these mountains until I died, probably in some stupid accident or taken by an animal. I had accepted it. But now I cannot imagine any other life than this one, with you and our son." Emmeline leaned against his shoulder, watching James sleep. "People in town said I was too simple to understand love, but I think maybe they had it backward. Maybe love is simple and they made it complicated." "You understand love better than anyone I have ever known," Yannick said softly. "You show it in everything you do every day. That is not simple. That is profound." Summer arrived with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and warm sun that made James coo with pleasure when they took him outside. Emmeline would spread a blanket in the yard and let him lie there, watching the clouds and the birds, his small hands reaching for things he could not yet grasp. Yannick had carved him toys from wood, smooth animals and simple shapes that James grasped and gummed with intense concentration. They had settled into a new rhythm, the three of them, a family now in every sense of the word. Yannick still ran his trap lines and hunted for food, but he also spent hours playing with his son, his serious face transforming with smiles whenever James looked at him. Emmeline managed the household and the garden and cared for James, but she also made time for herself, for the things that brought her joy, like walking in the forest or sitting by the stream. One evening in late July, they had a visitor. A young couple appeared at the cabin, lost and exhausted, having wandered off the main trail 2 days earlier. Yannick and Emmeline fed them, gave them a place to sleep, and the next morning Yannick guided them back to the trail that would lead them to the settlement. "Thank you," the woman said, her eyes welling with tears. "We thought we were going to die out here." "These mountains can be dangerous if you do not know them," Yannick said, "but they can also be beautiful and generous. Respect them and they will provide." After the couple left, Emmeline said to Yannick, "We should do that more often, help people who get lost." "It is a lot to ask of you," Yannick said. "Strangers in our home." "We have so much," Emmeline gestured at the cabin, the valley, their life together. "We should share it when we can." So they made it known in the settlement that the Olsen cabin would welcome travelers who needed shelter or guidance. It happened only a few times a year, but Emmeline found she enjoyed it, the chance to talk to new people and hear news from the wider world, even as she remained perfectly content in her mountain isolation. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. James became a toddler, then a little boy, strong and curious like his father, kind and observant like his mother. Emmeline and Yannick talked about having more children, and when James was 3, Emmeline found herself pregnant again. This time, she delivered a daughter, tiny and perfect, with Emmeline's honey-colored hair and a smile that appeared within days of her birth. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew near the creek, and James took to his role as big brother with serious dedication, always wanting to help care for his baby sister. "Our family is complete," Yannick said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James chase fireflies while Emmeline nursed Rose. "This is everything I never knew I needed." "Do you ever miss town?" Emmeline asked. "Other people, easier living?" "Never," he said emphatically. "This is where I belong. With you, with our children in these mountains. Everything else is just noise." When Rose was 2 and James was 5, they took a rare trip down to Randsburg. Emmeline had not been back since the day they married, and she was curious to see how the town had changed. They made quite a sight, riding into town, Yannick on his bay with James in front of him, Emmeline on her mare with Rose tucked in a sling against her chest. People stared, and Emmeline heard the whispers. There was Emmeline Crawford, the simple girl who married the mountain man. Except she was Emmeline Olsen now, and she was not simple or broken or any of the things they had labeled her. She was a wife, a mother, a partner in a life she had built with her own hands and heart. They visited the general store for supplies, and Emmeline ran into her Aunt Beatrice on the street. The older woman looked shocked, her eyes taking in Emmeline's healthy glow, her confident bearing, the beautiful children at her side. "Emmeline," Beatrice said faintly, "I heard you were still alive up there." "Very much alive," Emmeline said pleasantly, "and very happy." "Aunt Beatrice, these are my children, James and Rose." James, well trained by his father, said politely, "Pleased to meet you, madam." Beatrice looked like she did not know what to say. Finally, she managed, "You look well." "I am well. We all are." Emmeline felt Yannick's hand on her back, solid and supportive. "I hope you are well too." They did not stay long in town, just long enough to get supplies and let the children see the place where their parents had met. On the ride back to the mountains, James asked, "Why did that lady look at us funny?" "Some people do not understand that there are different ways to live," Yannick explained. They think everyone should want the same things they want, but the world is bigger than that. I like our way, James declared. Mountains are better than towns. I think so too, Emmeline agreed, exchanging a smile with Yannick over the children's heads. By the time James was 10 and Rose was 7, they were both competent in mountain living, able to help with chores and contribute to the family's survival. Yannick taught James to trap and hunt, to read weather and track animals. Emmeline taught Rose to identify plants, to cook and preserve food, to find beauty in the small things. But they also taught both children to read and write and do mathematics, using the books Yannick ordered from catalogs, and the lessons Emmeline remembered from her own schooling. We want you to have choices, Emmeline told them one evening as they worked through lessons by lantern light. If you want to stay in the mountains when you grow up, that is wonderful. But if you want to go to the city to pursue education or different work, you should be prepared for that too. I want to stay here forever, James said firmly. Just like you and Pa. Me too, Rose echoed. The mountains are home. Emmeline and Yannick exchanged glances, knowing that children's minds changed, but pleased nonetheless that their children loved the life they had built. More years passed, the cabin expanding as Yannick added new rooms, the land becoming even more productive as they learned its rhythms and secrets. They weathered harsh winters and dry summers, sickness and injury, the normal struggles of frontier life. But through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation everything else was built upon on their 20th wedding anniversary. Yannick surprised Emmeline by taking her back to the high meadow where he had once told her he wanted to freeze a moment forever. We cannot freeze moments, he said, echoing his words from so long ago. But we built a lifetime of them, just like I promised. Emmeline looked at him, this man who had seen her when no one else would, who had offered her a life beyond her wildest dreams. His hair was threaded with silver now, his face lined from years of mountain sun and wind, but his eyes were the same clear blue that had first captivated her in the doorway of a boarding house. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. Thank you for teaching me that love was not too complicated for me to understand. Thank you for showing me it in ways that made sense to my heart. You taught me just as much, Yannick said, pulling her close. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that intelligence is not the same as wisdom, that the simplest truths are often the most profound. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emmeline Olsen. They stood together in the meadow, the same one where they had lain years ago, and watched the sun set over the mountains they called home. Their children were grown now, James 19 and courting a girl from the settlement, Rose 16 and already showing signs of her mother's gift for reading the natural world. Soon enough, there would be grandchildren, another generation to carry on the legacy of love and resilience they had built. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the broken pieces the world had tried to define them by. Ready to go home? Yannick asked as the stars began to appear. Emmeline took his hand, weathered and strong and familiar as her own. I am already home, she said. I have been since the day I chose you. They walked back to the cabin together. Through the forest they knew like their own heartbeats, toward the warm light spilling from the windows and the life they had created together. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, silent witnesses to a love story that had defied every expectation, proving that the simplest understanding of love, given freely and received with open hearts, was the truest understanding of all. In the years that followed, their life continued in the rhythms they had established. James married his sweetheart, a practical girl named Anna who adapted to mountain life with the same determination Emmeline had shown. They built a cabin of their own on the far side of the valley, close enough for family but far enough for independence. Within 2 years, James and Anna had given Emmeline and Yannick their first grandchild, a robust boy they named after Yannick. Rose, meanwhile, showed no interest in settling down young. She was too fascinated by the mountains, by the plants and animals and the changing seasons. She spent weeks at a time on her own, camping and exploring, returning with detailed journals of what she had seen and learned. Emmeline recognized in her daughter the same need for solitude that had driven Yannick to the mountains in the first place, and she encouraged it rather than trying to force Rose into a more conventional path. "Let her find her own way," Emmeline counseled Yannick when he worried about Rose being alone so much. "She is capable and strong. She will come to love and marriage if and when it is right for her. We cannot force these things." "I know," Yannick sighed. "I just want her to be happy." "She is happy," Emmeline assured him. "Look at her face when she comes back from her expeditions. That is the face of someone who is exactly where they are meant to be." And indeed, Rose did eventually find love, though not until she was 24. She met a naturalist from back east who had come to California to study the Sierra Nevada ecosystem, and they bonded over their shared passion for understanding the natural world. He was nothing like Yannick, slight and scholarly where Yannick was large and physical, but he had the same essential decency, the same respect for Rose as an equal partner. They married and split their time between the mountains and the university where he taught, Rose becoming an accomplished naturalist in her own right, publishing papers and drawings that brought attention to the fragile beauty of the high country. Emmeline and Yannick aged gracefully together, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts as strong as ever. They became the wise elders of their scattered mountain community, people coming to them for advice on everything from how to survive a harsh winter to how to navigate the complexities of marriage and family. "It is strange," Emmeline said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "People used to say I was too simple to understand anything complicated. Now they come to me for wisdom." "That is because you were never simple," Yannick said, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "You were just honest, and honesty, it turns out, is a kind of wisdom the world desperately needs." When Yannick was 65, he fell from a rocky outcropping while checking a trap line and broke his leg badly. It was the kind of injury that, in their isolated location, could have been fatal, but Emmeline and James worked together to set the bone and care for him through the long weeks of healing. Yannick, forced into immobility for the first time in his adult life, struggled with the confinement. "I am useless," he grumbled one afternoon, frustrated at his inability to even walk across the room without help. "You are healing," Emmeline corrected, sitting beside his bed with mending in her lap. "There is a difference. Your body is doing the hard work of knitting itself back together." "That is not useless. But I cannot provide for you, cannot take care of you, Yannick Olsen," Emmeline interrupted, her voice firm. "You have provided for me and taken care of me for over 30 years. You are allowed to need care in return. That is what family is for, what love is for." He was quiet for a moment, then reached for her hand. "How did I get so lucky as to find you?" "We found each other," she said softly. "And we chose each other every day since. That is not luck, that is love." Yannick's leg healed, though he walked with a slight limp afterward and had to give up the more strenuous aspects of mountain living. But he adapted, finding new ways to contribute, teaching his grandson and other young people the skills he had honed over a lifetime. He became a storyteller, weaving tales of mountain adventures that kept children and adults alike captivated for hours. When Emmeline was 58, she had a spell of dizziness that left her bedridden for several days. The doctor James brought from the settlement could find nothing specifically wrong, but he warned that age was taking its toll and she should take things easier. "I am not ready to be old," Emmeline protested to Yannick. "Then do not be," he said practically. "We will just be older, but we do not have to be old. Not in the ways that matter." They made adjustments, slowing their pace but not stopping, accepting help from their children and grandchildren but not surrendering their independence. They still walked in the forest, though not as far or as fast. They still sat by the stream, though Yannick had to help Emmeline over the rougher ground. They still made love, though less frequently and with more gentleness, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were rarely necessary. "You have any regrets?" Emmeline asked him one winter evening as they sat by the fire, the snow falling softly outside. They were both in their late 60s now, their hair silver, their faces lined with the evidence of lives fully lived. Yannick thought for a long moment. "None," he said finally. "Every choice I made led me to you, to this life. How could I regret any of it? Even the hard parts, the loneliness before we met, even that," he confirmed. "Because it taught me to appreciate what I found in you. If life had been easy, I might not have recognized the gift you are." Emmeline leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, constant as the mountains themselves. "I was so afraid, that day in Randsburg, afraid of being married to Philip, but also afraid of choosing you, of the unknown. But it was the best decision I ever made." "We made it together," Yannick reminded her. "I offered, but you chose. Your courage changed both our lives." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Then Emmeline said quietly, "I am not afraid of dying. Not anymore. I have lived such a full life, loved and been loved in return. That is more than many people ever get." "We have years yet," Yannick said, though his voice was rough with emotion. "I am not ready to let you go. I know, I am not ready either. But when the time comes, whenever that is, I want you to know that every single day with you was a gift. Every morning waking up beside you, every meal shared, every challenge faced together. You made me understand that I was never too simple for love. I just needed to find the right person to love, and the right person to love me in return." Yannick pulled her closer, his arms still strong despite the years. "You are the strongest, smartest, most capable person I have ever known. Anyone who could not see that was blind." They held each other as the fire burned low and the snow continued to fall. Two people who had built a life of meaning and love from the scattered pieces the world had tried to discard. Emmeline lived to be 73, healthy and active until the very end, when her heart simply stopped one morning as she sat in the garden, her hands in the earth she had tended for so many years. Yannick found her there, a peaceful expression on her face, and though his grief was a physical pain that threatened to break him, he also felt gratitude that she had gone quickly, without suffering, doing something she loved. He lived another 5 years, cared for by James and Anna, spending his days sitting on the porch of the cabin he had built with his own hands, watching the mountains change with the seasons. He spoke often of Emmeline, keeping her memory alive through stories told to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "Your grandmother was extraordinary," he would tell them. "Not in spite of being different, but because of it. She saw the world in ways others could not, understood truths that others missed. She taught me that love is not complicated. It is simple and pure and honest, and that is what makes it powerful." On a clear spring morning, with wildflowers blooming across the meadow and the mountains brilliant with new growth, Yannick Olsen took his last breath. James found him in the rocking chair, facing the window that looked toward the high meadow where he had proposed to Emmeline so many years ago, a slight smile on his weathered face. They buried him beside Emmeline in the small cemetery they had established on the property, overlooking the valley they had loved. The simple headstones read, Emmeline Crawford Olsen, 1862, 1935. She understood love perfectly. Yannick Olsen, 1860-1940. He showed her how their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren maintained the cabin and the land, preserving it as a reminder of what two people could build when they chose love over fear, acceptance over judgment, simplicity over complication. The story of Emmeline and Yannick became a family legend, told and retold, evolving with each generation but always maintaining its essential truth. That love in its purest form requires no special intelligence or complicated understanding. It requires only an open heart, honest communication, and the courage to choose each other, again and again, through all the days of a shared life. And in the high mountains of California, where the pines whisper secrets to the wind and the streams run clear and cold, their legacy lives on, a testament to the simple, profound truth that Emmeline understood better than anyone. Love is not something you think your way into. It is something you feel, something you live, something you build one day at a time with the person who sees you truly and chooses you completely, exactly as you are.